Okay, so should be live. Are we live? I'm no good at this. Yes, okay, looks like I am. Perfect. Now the question is can you hear me? I hope you can. Um, wait. Okay. Seemed I had to stream on my phone. I seem to be able to run it there. We're amateur here with StreamYard. I'm not a professional. I don't stream regularly. Bear with me here. So I want to talk about mystery design, the Night Danger school of mystery design, um, and to demonstrate this, I'm gonna take you through oh, designing a mystery. So if I go ahead here and open up, we'll need that, and we'll need this one. Perfect. Okay. So when I design a mystery, this is start by the conventional mystery model would be you have location A leads to location B leads to conclusion. Or maybe if you're getting real spicy with it, maybe it's location A leads to location B, C, or D, forks back to conclusion. So it like forks out and then tapers back to a conclusion. And like it works, but I don't like it. I don't like that you have the ending planned when you sit down with the players. I don't like the idea of the intended conclusion uh, being a part of uh, actually a part of the adventure. So I whipped up. I had this lovely index card with the shorthand of a mystery adventure that I had whipped up for some friends of mine. We never got around to running it, and so I thought that we could look at it and dissect it because it's the same structure that I used for my favorite campaign that I've ever run, which was a Call of Cthulhu game set in 1970s Los Angeles. They were all cops. There was an MK Ultra, uh, alien compromat secret society thing. It was a good time. It was a really good time, and I used this structure. So, if you look over here, we have this lovely triangle. Now, each sub triangle represents either a location, a person, a region, a set of data. Um, you could think of it like a room in a dungeon, or you could think of it like a uh, yeah, like a section in like a Call of Cthulhu adventure. And so the players begin at 0. Now, each location is going to have clues that lead to the adjacent locations. So zone 0 is going to have clues, data points, that lead to location 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 is going to have clues that lead back to 0, up to 7, and over to 6. And then, for purposes that will become clear later, uh, you can think of this almost like a folded D4, where you could fold up the outer triangles, and so thus 6 leads to 1, 5, and 7, or 13 leads to 14, 15, and 5. And so, how I've mapped these adventures, these mysteries, is I start very simple. I wrote down on the very top of the index card, Jupe Vanderbeek found murdered alongside his wife. That's zone 0. This is the initiation of the mystery. I like mysteries with either actual cops or professional investigators. I don't like a plucky band of misfits. Um, uh, I like real actual detectives. But You've got Zone 0, Jupe Vanderbeek, found murdered alongside his new wife. And then I just start spitballing, just freewheeling it. Zone 1 is, of course, who's his wife? His wife's Belinda Jane, and she grew up in a closed communion, weirdo, like, splinter American cult. Like, there's a bajillion of these. You know, Hutterites. Well, the Hutterites aren't American, but like Church of Christian Science, Branch Davidians, you know, one of those weird splinters. So she grows up in that kind of environment. Who is he? He's Zone 2, professor at U Ottawa, specialized in Ugaritic poetry. Ugaritic being the language spoke like in Babylonian times or pre-Babylonian times in Syria. So ancient Near East. And then finally, where does he live? He's got an apartment in Sandy Hill. Sandy Hill's a neighborhood in Ottawa that is just, it's right by the university. And so I've got these three facts. Where he was murdered, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. So we're spitballing here. But let's say, here, I need to adjust my keyboard so that I can type freely. Bear with me here. Let's say he was murdered at, he was killed like exiting like a restaurant or something, like it was like really public, like a drive-by or something really where the location isn't necessarily all that relevant to the investigation. Like maybe he was like in the parking lot after going to, yeah, let's say the South Keys, Montana's parking lot. He was out for dinner with his wife. They go out into the parking lot at the end of the night, and someone murders them. So now we already have another extra little bit of detail, but the important thing here is I actually don't want the location of the murder, or even necessarily for now, the murder weapon or method to be all that important. So what I'm trying to look at is trying to build a web of connections and variables that I can then use later to fill in the details. So at this point, we can just start branching out, and I basically did this in order. Like I just started going, I put the numbers down and I just started going one zone at a time in ascending order around and around until I had filled out all 16 zones. So after 1, 2, so 2, he's a professor, Ugaritic poetry. 3, he's got an apartment in Sandy Hill. Okay, so we've got 2 adjacent zones to zone 3, and we're ascending, so we're going to go from zone 3 to zone 4, and this is where things get interesting, because your inner layer is like your immediate facts, but then your next layer, your 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12, these are kind of your tertiary, like this is, okay, you've gotten the basics of the case down, now where did those extra facts lead you? And then at the very edge, 14, 15, and 13, that's where, you know, you get some actual weird stuff going down. And you can cheat, you can read ahead, but this is besides the point. Zone 4, we've got, well, maybe there's a lot of people who have, if they're reasonably well off, they have cottages. There's a lot of people who have like lake houses and stuff here, but for reasons that, like, the juices started flowing and I kind of already was starting to think about what I was going to fill the later sections in, I decide he's got a lake house, not a lake house, but like a rental property that he sometimes lives at and sometimes doesn't live at, like an Airbnb. Like most of the year he's renting it as an Airbnb, along the St. Lawrence River, here in Cornwall, which is southeast of Ottawa. It's like an hour and a half, I think, from downtown. But anyways, so he's got this rental property here, and zone 5, well, you know, near that rental property, all along the St. Lawrence River, like say from Cornwall and then going along to the west all the way up to Brockville. There's been like all kinds of people just disappearing, and this is pulled from a bit of real world events, because actually along the St. Lawrence a lot of people do go missing. In particular, there's actually a lot of human trafficking that happens along the St. Lawrence, and in particular right here through Cornwall, because of this island. Cornwall Island is entirely the property of the I'm going to get this wrong, Akwesasne Reserve number 59. And this is significant because this reserve technically has land both in the state of New York, in Quebec, and in Ontario, and it crosses the border. And so it's very it's just kind of a known thing that illegal tobacco products cross the border here. A lot of illegal migration happens through this island because it's hard to police the border because of like various treaty issues. And so this island's very popular for things to go through. And you know, they a couple years ago they pulled like 8 bodies out of the St. Lawrence River near this island. That sort of thing, it's evocative, and I put that down on the list, and it starts to flesh out, ooh, maybe something interesting is happening here. We move on to number 6. Item number 6, I see that its adjacent tiles are tile 5, which we just established is that there's been missing persons cases all along the St. Lawrence. But then the other adjacent ones is 7, which we haven't gotten to yet. But number 1, Belinda, Jupe Vanderbeek's wife. If there's missing people, and this is related to the missing people and also related to the wife, I decided one of the missing people is Belinda's first husband, estranged ex-husband. Maybe he's missing, maybe he's involved in making people go missing. We haven't decided that yet, but we know that she's was married once before, and that her ex-husband is in some way connected to the missing people that are vanishing along the river. Moving on up to number 7, also adjacent to both the husband and to Belinda, it follows. It's like the natural conclusion would be Belinda's family. Now there's a village just outside the Ottawa city limits, kind of southeast, called Embrun. And Embrun is very French, not Quebec French, but Franco-Ontarian French. And with the Belinda being probably American, I think the cult that she grew up in is definitely like of American origin, and obviously then English speaking. I like to think that her family, they live on a commune, and it's near Embrun, which will be fun for the players because it means that when they're trying to investigate this commune, if they try to ask the locals in Embrun about this cult, the locals, it's a great excuse to put on a bad French accent and have a little fun with that, but also the local French don't like the English, and they don't like anyone who speaks English. And if you know anything about Canadian history, most of the French communities in Canada also really, really don't like religion. They've got a lot of baggage about religion in general since about the 60s. And so having situated the commune somewhere where it's really plausible that the locals really, really hate these guys, provide an opportunity either for malicious compliance, where the locals are really, really enthusiastic to help the police investigate this family, or maybe they're really obstinate. They don't want to help at all because they don't. It's like, those crazy cultists. I know nothing. I know nothing. You can have fun with that. So that gives us number 7. Number 8. What's weird about these? It's connected to her family, and then also connected to uh, 9 and 14, but we haven't gotten there yet. But so it's just like her family is, we've established some kind of weirdo cult. I am sympathetic to the idea of that a they're a cult that practices kind of a weird revival of Earth Mother worship. So you have like they have vaguely Christian aesthetics, but rather than the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's like the Father, Son, and Mother, and that kind of mother worship is that's like classic. You can get real folk horror with that, real Wicker Man, like fertility cult weirdo stuff. And to tie it, if we look back down here, item number 2, professor at UOttawa specialized in Ugaritic poetry. I know that I'm going to want to connect Zone 9 to both Zone 2 and Zone 8. So if I've got Earth, like mother worship, and I know that he's into the pre-Bronze Age Near East, did some Google Foo, and there's a mother goddess that was worshipped in Phrygia, and adopted by some of the Greeks. But before that, the worship of Kubelea Mater is actually Neolithic Anatolian mountain mother. That there's this kind of broad fertility goddess figure from Turkey in the Neolithic, and then leading into the Bronze Age, it gets adapted by the Phrygians and brought down to Greece. And so maybe the cult, Belinda's family, they worship just like a generic mother goddess, but it's connected. If you scratch the Maltese falcon, it reveals that under the veneer of this kind of generic hippie Christian cult, there is a much older antediluvian religion happening. And that Anatolian connection gives us that kind of Near East, Middle Eastern, well, not East, yeah, like Asia Minor connection to his academic interests. So we have the mother goddess here. We've got Ugaritic poetry. This brings us right and really nicely to item number 9. Maybe coming off of, if they follow up with the fact that he's a professor at University of Ottawa, location number 2, they're going to find out that he went on a archaeological trip back in the day to Turkey with some colleagues, and that he was the only member of the team to make it home. That was somehow fun. It fundamentally changed him. Something went really wrong. Who knows what he found in those ancient ruins? Jumping from there around, also still connected to his time at the university, and connected to the archaeological trip. Maybe he also did, like, he's specialized in Ugaritic poetry, but he also did a dissertation on Phrygian religious music. There's a great book, it's behind me, Lynn Thorndike's History of Magic and Experimental Science, and in it he talks about how for the Babylonians and a lot of your early Near East, basically all magic and religious belief were deeply tied in with the music. So you have like music, poetry, religion, and magic are all basically synonymous. And so maybe he took his interest in ancient poetry and discovered some things on his trip. And he's got a dissertation on Phrygian religious music, which, of course, if we prod that, jumping from 10 to 9 to 8 will lead us back to this ominous mother goddess worship. So we can, continuing around the wheel here, Zone 11. I wanted this to be kind of innocuous, like adjacent to his dissertation on Phrygian religious music. Maybe it mentions the fact, because you can't have it all be like too heavy and too mysterious all at once. You need a couple of these zones to be kind of innocuous and potentially an opportunity for like some comic relief, because I find that if you make a mystery game too bleak or too heavy all the time, it's draining both on you and on the players. It can become very emotionally taxing. So maybe he's in a faculty jam band at the university, and to lean into his kind of research interests, he plays the duduk, which is a Armenian clarinet. And like anytime, like in the Gladiator soundtrack, or anytime like a movie wants something to sound Middle Eastern, they always uh, include the duduk. Uh, so he plays in like this like dad band with a bunch of his university friends, and maybe his some of the music that he worked on with Phrygian religious music. Maybe some of that music is making its way into his jams. Maybe there is some sorcery happening at these jam sessions, which connects us to zone number 12, the Three Tiers Jazz Club. So it's the club where the band plays. There's evidence that maybe he's a regular there in his apartment. So his apartment is zone 3. So there's evidence that there and it connects to that. And then zone 4, he's got a rental property in Cornwall. Maybe there's more evidence at the rental property that this club is a place that he frequents. Now my original sticky note has in brackets next to Three Tiers Jazz Club, um, Cannibal Hit. And I don't remember what I meant by that when I wrote that. I don't recall why I wrote it. I think it might have had something to do with I had just read uh, the third Invocation to Legba by Manly Wade Wellman, and there's like this jazz. The opening has like this jazz club that has like hints of like voodoo ritualism in the jazz club, which is very like trite. It's like kind of cliche, but I like the idea that there's something sinister happening at this club. I don't know if it's cannibals or not. I feel like that's a bit of a hard swerve. If it is a cannibal pit, maybe we leave it a cannibal pit. We need a couple, we need some stuff, evidence at zone 3, 11, and 4 to kind of hint at that. That it's not just that he's a regular there. It's not just that the band plays there. It's that the band plays there and there's something kind of weird going on with this place. Maybe with the jam band, we hear when the players interrogate other members of his band, they imply that after shows sometimes he'd go into a back room with some of the staff, and we wouldn't see him for the rest of the night. You gotta build that up. Um, but I guess it depends on what direction we want to take this and how complicit in whatever paranormal evil is going on here we want Mr. Jupe Vanderbeek to be. Is because we still haven't decided. Is he intentionally participating in this paranormal weirdness, or is his wife intentionally participating in this paranormal weirdness? We don't know. We're literally just filling out this map with locations. We're filling it out with uh, just points of interest that may or may not have a lot of plausible connection, but have a loose connection. And then once we have this top down spread laid out before us, we can organize it and tighten it up and make it all fit together. So brings us from zone 12 to zone 13. Now we're getting into like, here's the weird stuff that's going on. So zone 13, I look at it. We're not going to, obviously we haven't fleshed out 14 and 15 yet at this stage. So I look at 13 and the only adjacent thing is 5. Missing persons along the St. Lawrence. And I think that there's also, because I see that 13 is, well, I just think that, yeah, I think that there's smuggling happening, and so there's psychoactive drugs being moved over the border. Shipments, maybe not drugs, but maybe also weird old stuff like mummy dust or tablets, alchemical goods. There's something to do. There's something being moved through uh, something being moved through this uh, um, through this res uh, that has to do with item 14, which it was a happy accident that I discovered it. If I zoom out and zoom in up and then zoom out, there we go. Up here, just north of Cornwall, there's this lake, Loch Garry, and it has almost no. There's a couple cottages, but there's not really much going on it. And there's this island in the middle of it, Munro's Island, and I'm like, perfect. It's like it's not that close to there's the lake there. It's not that it's kind of out of the way of Ottawa, but if you were to follow the 417, like follow the highway, it's not that out of the way if you're also headed to Cornwall. And that kind of connection is exactly the sort of thing I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a place that's kind of off in the woods, but not too inconvenient, um, for there to be some Wicker Man stuff, some for Zone 14, we have to remember that it's adjacent to number 8, the Neolithic Anatolian Mother Goddess. I want some kind of weird folk horror ritual, and I think it happens on that island at some point. And I can flesh out maybe the locals are in on it, maybe the locals don't know about it. Does the ritual happen at night? Does it happen during the day? Maybe it only happens in the winter, and so the locals in the morning they wake up and they find that there's snowmobile tracks or foot tracks all over the lake, indicating that somebody had went and been up to stuff at the island. Depends on what time of year you want to set the adventure. The point being, I found a nice little spot. It's kind of a plausible jog. And actually, now that I've zoomed out, you can see. So there's Cornwall, where the rental property is, and where the drugs and or missing people are happening. And then if we come up here, there's the lake, and right here, Embrun and Limoges. These two spots are very French. This is where we're going to put Belinda's family cult, is somewhere in the area around Embrun. And so you kind of have, especially if you're really keeping track of time, you have these locations where it takes to get from Embrun into downtown Ottawa would be about 45 minutes if there's no traffic. It's annoying, but it's not terrible because you just kind of jog up onto the highway and ride it into town. And so if you're keeping track of where players are, especially if they're splitting up and following up on multiple leads at once, it's nice to have, even if you're using made up locations, there is no commune outside Embrun, but having it mapped to a real map in Google and setting it in a modern day. The nice thing about that is then when you're tracking how long it takes players to do things, you can just literally pull out Google Maps and say oh, how long would it take for me to get from Embrun to Loch Garry? How long would it take for me to get from Cornwall to the University of Ottawa? Anyways, finally, there's a lot of stuff moving over the border, and including psychoactive drugs and some kind of weird ritual happening on the island, which is the other two things adjacent. And connected to it is the faculty jam band. I thought that there's some kind of government awareness of it, and it's not the Canadian government. I think it's funnier to me if the Canadian government is entirely oblivious to the weird paranormal goings on, but it has caught the attention of American spooks like CIA or maybe the Border Patrol. I don't know how aggressive the Border Patrol is on the St. Lawrence. I see their boats on the river sometimes when I'm out with my in-laws. But I don't know. I think that there's, and this is probably the least fleshed out clue or location, but yeah, there's definitely some kind of a covert American federal interest in what's going on with Mr. Vanderbeek, especially if some weird old stuff is being brought over the border, like stuff that would normally get hidden in the Smithsonian It depends how archaic we want to get this. Now, we have all of these locations, and they're kind of connected, but we don't have a adventure yet because it's the players can I can and I won't do this on stream. I can go through and I can make sure, like following your 3 clue rule, that for every possible move from 0 to 2, from 2 to 10, from 10 to 11, from 1 to 0, like if I can have a plausible move from each location, and give it 3 clues for each of that, which comes out to um mental math, 30 38, 16 times 3. No, it's more than that because it's not 3 clues per zone. It's 3 clues per direction out of each zone. So 9 clues per zone, 16 zones. Anyways, I can fill out all kinds of little bits and details, and some of them I can just make up. I can, if I haven't had time to prep this, and you can kind of zero prep if you have this loose paradigm. And I did do this when I was running the LA Cops Call of Cthulhu game. I know that location 7 leads to location 8. And so I can just kind of, as the players are poking around and asking questions, I can make something up in the moment that hints at location 8. Like uh, uh, a message left on the answering machine, or like out of LA Noir, a book of matches that's branded with the club or whatever. So you want to prep a little bit, but you can also this leaves room for improvisation. And um, once we have our broad thing, there's another thing that we have to do. There's one more piece of prep that we must do before we start playing. As the players investigate, the ultimate goal is to figure out who killed Jupe Vanderbeek and Belinda Jane and why. And as they investigate, they're going to discover that, oh man, it's so much bigger than the murder of Jupe Vanderbeek, that crazy Dutchman. It's so much bigger than all this. We need to have. They're going to start pulling on threads, and it's like, wait, hold up. There's like weird occult worship of some ancient goddess, and maybe potentially jazz cannibals, and like the American government and drug trafficking, and it spirals out into a conspiracy that you can follow kind of indefinitely in any direction. But you need a bit of closure. You need to kind of be able to tie a knot on parts of it before the players, or as the players, are moving on to the bigger scope of the investigation. So we have to decide, and you must do this before the game starts. Out of all of these locations, who killed Jupe Vanderbeek? Was it Belinda's estranged ex-husband? Maybe he suspected that Jupe was catching on to his involvement in the missing people. Maybe he's a human trafficker. We don't know. Now, the important question that we have to ask, if that's the case, is Belinda's estranged ex-husband. Is her ex-husband also, did he also grow up in this cult? Or did he take her out of it? Or did she bring him in? These are questions that we would have to flesh out. But the important question, and I don't want to spend all night on this stream, and I want to leave some stuff to the imagination here. But you have to ask, who did it? Maybe maybe a member of the jam band is a sorcerer, is like an honest to goodness sorcerer, and he killed Jupe Vanderbeek to absorb his jazz powers, his to absorb his musical sorcerer's power, to steal his occult research. Maybe they were rival occult musicians, and one of the members of the band killed him to get a hold of his stuff. Which, if that's the case, then this is where we get to kind of the second last stage. Once we've picked who killed Jupe, this lets us set up a couple clocks, right? So for example here, Faculty Jam Band, Zone 11. If unbothered by not NPCs, by PCs for, trying to type around my microphone here, for 3 days after the murder, will attempt to break into rental house. So we've got, let's look, we're gonna, as I flesh these out, we're just gonna assume that, yeah, rival sorcerer in the jam band. And so you can set these conditional clocks. If unbothered by if the players are like off, they're sniffing around the cult, they're sniffing around the missing persons, and they're not giving any attention to the drug trafficking and the cannibal jazz club and all of that. They're not paying attention to any of that. Then his rival is going to go and break into the rental house and try and maybe access the secret library that's in the basement and steal all of his research. Maybe steal some of the weird old stuff. Yeah. To steal weird old stuff. Yeah. Once you've got a clock like that, you can also set clocks on individual zones that don't tie to any other zone. So like, let's look at maybe Belinda's family is maybe they're really burning through their goodwill, and you just set a clock of like, so the local French don't like them. 6 days in local French chase out. Like there's like a, not an angry mob, but there's like a show of force from the locals, and the commune decides that enough is enough and it's time for maybe us to sell the place and move on to greener pastures. Maybe we'll go, I don't know, down to Pennsylvania or something. And so there's some of these clocks can be closing off leads. So if they take too long to interrogate Belinda's family becomes inaccessible to them because the important members of the family, the people who could actually answer the questions, have fled because of reprisals from the locals. Or a clock or a conditional can also do things like introduce a new problem. Like, well, Jupe Vanderbeek was murdered by his wife, but if the after so many days another kill happens, and this opens up an opportunity for, for another kill, what I would do is I would layer it out, have it good 10, 15 days of in-game time ahead, or longer if you're using one-to-one time. The point is, like, 4 or 5, maybe 6 sessions into the investigation, you have the players receive news that another similar murder has happened somewhere else, and you build an entirely separate web like this. And what you could do is, and at this point I'm going to move away from my notes and the map because you don't need it, because I'm going to kind of explain the last thing that you can do. So we'll come over here. once you've got your web and you know who did it, in this case we decided it's Zone 11. Zone 11 is the killer, and all this other stuff is just extra conspiracy. And you can just stop there. The players find the killer, they learn that it's so much bigger than they could have imagined, and then you stop. Or let's make that eraser a little bigger. Or, oh goodness, I'm a real technological wizard. I really know my stuff. Or you expand it outwards. And this is the nice thing about this kind of style of investigating, is that it doesn't have a intended final boss or final confrontation. It, because it's a conspiracy, it's not an open and shut case. It can kind of just fractal and spread outwards, and so we can let's drop the size of that back down, like, yeah, about there. So now going off, we have a new set of clues. You know, yeah, yeah, new mysteries, new problems that can eventually, like, you could, so we said as the jazz guy killed him, and so it does have to do with the evil sorceress Jazz and the CIA operative and the psychedelic drugs and all that, but it also still has to do with the weird ritual on Monroe Island and the what really went down on that archaeological trip back in the 70s. Um, and so now you have an entirely new set, A, B, C, like you have an entirely new set of zones, and you can extend that way. And you can also, you could break the rules. You don't have to fractal the same way. Shapes are arbitrary. Maybe in this direction, it goes out in squares, a grid of clues with diminishing sizes. So, like zone here, 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 right? And then maybe you find that this side of it isn't all that interesting at all. So you just leave this one as is. And they're spreading out. And so as the campaign progresses and as your players pull on the threads of conspiracy, they will tell you in the same way that when you have a hex map, you have a spread of wilderness. Your players will tell you what's interesting, and they'll tell you what they care about based on what they choose to explore. With a conspiracy, your players will choose what clues and what threads are interesting to them, and that's the ones that they'll investigate, and those are the ones that you kind of improvise and prepare for from week to week as you progress through the um, investigation. Um, and you can kind of do this indefinitely. um, I wouldn't recommend it. Like, eventually, like any episodic procedural cop show with a grand overarching conspiracy, it gets tired after a while. You know, the X-Files did start to suck after a little while. And so you eventually you might want to just say we're done, or maybe a moment will come where the players do something or they solve something and it just feels like, you know what, this is it. This is where we ought to stop. This is a satisfying location. Um, and I really just think that this model of a web of interconnected points that can be explored in any direction and in any order and do not necessarily lead to a single predetermined end state is a more satisfying and engaging and agency respecting way of handling a mystery. Um, yeah, so I think I've kind of talked myself out, and I'm not sure how coherent I've been. I kind of locked in. Um, I think maybe I'll hop over and just take a look. Is there anybody in the chat? There's Mike. There's Scudder for Mike. But I appreciate you being around. All right. Well, I'm gonna just hop off and maybe I'll review this footage tomorrow and see if it's worth gassing up or if I simply talked into the void for, well, 45 minutes. Um, there's more to follow here. There's more stuff I want to do. I'd like to talk about uh, Bronsteining, this sort of thing. Because if we hop back over, sorry, each one of these locations could be potentially a person of interest that you could be running as a patron or a faction at the same time as having investigators. And then it raises the question of, well, do you have the people playing the investigators, the cops, and the people playing the factions? Do you have that be the same people? Do you expect separation? Do you try to run two separate groups of people and have them overlap? There's lots of ways that you might want to approach this. And I have a couple ideas. So I think I might return um, and stream about this more because yeah, I really feel like mystery design has been done not poorly, but done dirty. Like the railroad is just still so heavy in mystery modules and in mystery design, and I feel like you know we deserve better, and I believe that you can make it better. And as a final note, the reason that I built this adventure around Ottawa, around my hometown, around the surrounding area in the Ottawa Valley down to Cornwall, is because a big thing that I want to encourage people to do is to explore their own backyard, get to know, drive around your local city, the towns surrounding your city, the countryside, because there will be things that you see that spark the imagination. And it's my belief and my experience that when you run adventures set in the city that you and your players live in, assuming that you're playing in real life with, your real life friends, when you set it in that kind of familiar space, it becomes really if you've ever played in an established setting where all the players know the setting really well, like when I ran Star Wars, all my friends were Star Wars nerds, and so we're very familiar with the setting. And so I didn't have to explain stuff. I didn't have to stop and give lore dumps and be like, oh yeah, well, like on Tatooine, it's like this, because they all knew this. And likewise, when I ran in Ottawa for my players, I don't have to say, yeah, so like the city has this, there's like this area, it's kind of run down, and there's been attempts to gentrify it, but nothing's really stuck yet. I just say, I don't have to say all that. I just say, yeah, so this next piece of information, this next, yeah, it takes you to Vanier. And everyone just knows what I'm talking about. And that kind of really quick shorthand familiarity um, is really, really cool to play with at the table because um, it kind of enchants the world for you a little bit. Because then later when you're driving around, you might drive past it. It's like, oh, that that cabaret, that gentleman's club at the intersection of Rideau and Bank. Yeah, there's a vampire cult in the motel attached to it. Bet you didn't know that. And you kind of you develop these inside jokes, um, these personal in-group references. If you want to see a great example of this, look up Seth Skorkowski, the Scott Brown incident, where he inserted a real realtor from his hometown into his cyberpunk game. And it just became this really beloved, familiar joke amongst the friends. Yeah, pay attention to your own local area. I promise it's a lot cooler than you think it is, and there's lots of interesting stuff happening. And it gives you that kind of luxury of weaving in local folklore, local politics, local events and news, and creating something that is just about as personal to your table as you could imagine. So, this has been a lot of fun. I'll talk to y'all later. And I realized by starting this stream at midnight, nobody's really catching this live, but that's okay. Have yourselves a very good night, and we'll catch you all later.